to heal, yet still you fight with what you're told, and hold on to your scars and wounds and past of old. And I said, ooh, what would you do if you could lose all your burdens? Yeah. And I said, ooh, my words are few, but I love you. Those words, please hear them. Yeah. I can't begin to comprehend what you've been through. I wish it was all just pretend, just an awful dream. But please don't let your heart grow dead, for God restores it, brings hope and grace and truth and life. And I said, ooh, what would you do if you could lose?
Good morning, everybody, and welcome to Vox Community Church, and happy Mother's Day.
Happy Mother's Day.
Today is that day to say happy to you, mothers. I don't know what I'm saying.
Just so you know, on your way home from church today.
You should probably text your mother if you didn't do so already. All right, let's sing some songs this morning. Join us in singing. Come, now is the time to worship. Come, now is the time to give your heart. Come, just as you are to worship. Come, just as you are before your God. Come, come, now is the time to worship. Come, now is the time to give your heart. Come, just as you are to worship. Come, just as you are before your God. Come. One day every tongue will confess you are God. One day every knee will bow. Treasure remains for those who gladly choose you now. Come, now is the time to worship. Come, now is the time to give your heart. Come, just as you are to worship. Come, just as you are before your God. Come, one day every tongue will confess you are God. One day every knee will bow. Still the greatest treasure remains for those who gladly choose you now. One day every tongue will confess you are God. One day every knee will bow. Still the greatest treasure remains for those who gladly choose you now. Come, now is the time to worship. Come, now is the time to give your heart. Come, just as you are to worship. Come, just as you are before your God. Come, come, come. Lay my life down at your feet. You're the only one I need. I turn to you and you are always there. In troubled times, it's you I seek. I put you first, that's all I need. I humble all I am unto you. One way, Jesus, you're the only one that I could live for. One way, Jesus, you're the only one that I could live for. You are always, always there, every how and everywhere. Your grace abounds so deeply within me. You will never ever change. Yesterday, today the same. Forever till forever meets no end. One way, Jesus, you're the only one that I could live for. One way, Jesus, you're the only one that I could. One way, Jesus, you're the only one that I could live for. One way, Jesus, you're the only one that I could live for. You are the way, the truth, and the life. We live by faith and not by sight. For you, we're living all for you. You are the way, the truth, and the life. We live by faith and not by sight. For you, we're living all for you. Sing it again. You are the way, the truth, and the life. We live by faith and not by sight. For you, living all for you. One more time. You are the way, the truth, and the life. We live by faith and not by sight. For you, we're living all for you. One way, Jesus, you're the only one that I could live for. One way, Jesus, you're the only one that I could live for. One way, Jesus, you're the only one that I could live for. One way, Jesus, you're the only one that I could live for. Thanks, everybody. And now we have some things that people are going to talk about for announcements.
Yes, we have all of the announcements. Birthdays. We have no announcements. There are no announcements. But we do have birthdays. There's a couple birthdays. And I hear some old people, well, one old person anyways in this place, just had their 32nd anniversary. Now, I'm sorry, Carol Ann, because it does date you a little bit. 32 years with the same guy. And Janelle lovingly today, I think he dressed up like, the crocodile hunter. It's just amazing, just amazing. And 32 years, Carol Ann, just, wow. So we're all going to say a prayer for Carol Ann. No. So for those of you online who didn't hear that, somebody said the other day, that Carol Ann is doing the Lord's work. 32 years married to Janelle. Anyways, that's fantastic. You guys are awesome, and I love you very much. So that's great. Birthdays. We have Caleb's birthday was just this past week, I think, wasn't it? Today is Caleb's birthday. Fantastic. Isaiah's birthday yesterday. This past week? Okay. That's too many things. Okay, so Caleb, Isaiah, Malik, and Michelle. Is that it? Okay. Oh, you know what we forgot? A joke. Can somebody unmute that joke and can we put that up there?
Today's joke is a pretty dumb one. What kind of barns do you find on top of a mountain? These barns.
So in case you don't know who that is, that's our fearless leader at the top of Ben Nevis with his family and 2 feet of snow. Wow, and their last name is Barnes. So now that makes sense. Now context is there. All the people that didn't know were like, oh, that makes sense now. Okay, anyways, birthdays. Isaiah, Caleb, Malik, Michelle. Look how amazing I am. I remembered that. Isaiah, Caleb, Malik, and Michelle. You got it? No? Here. The one person who's responsible, let's put her back on microphone.
No! Don't do that.
That was fun.
No!
Okay, ready? Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, Caleb, Isaiah, Malik, and Michelle.
All those people.
Happy birthday to all of you. Lovely. Anyways, we're going to go for a break. We'll be back in 10 minutes.
mountains and the seas. Your river runs with love for me, and I will open up my heart and let the healer set me free. I'm happy to be in the truth, and I will daily lift my hands, for I will always sing of when your love came down. I could sing of your love forever. 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 Over the mountains and the sea, your river runs with love for me, and I will open up my heart and let the healer set me free. I'm happy to be in the truth, and I will daily lift my hands, for I will always sing of when your love came down. I could sing of your love forever. I could sing of your love forever. I could sing of your love forever. I could sing of your I could sing of your love. I could sing of your love forever. 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 Oh, I feel like dancing. It's foolishness, I know, but when the world has seen the light, we will dance with joy like we're dancing now. I could sing of your love. I could sing of your love forever. 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 Over the mountains and the sea, your river runs with love for me, and I will open up my heart and let the healer set me free. I'm happy to be in the truth, and I will daily lift my hands, for I will always sing of when your love came down. I could sing of your love forever. 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 Light of the world, you came down into darkness. Open my eyes, let me see beauty that made this heart adore you. Hope of a life spent with you. Am to worship, here I am to bow down, here I am to say that you're my God. You're altogether lovely, altogether worthy, altogether wonderful. to me. King of all days, oh so highly exalted, glorious in heaven above. Humbly you came to the earth you created, all for love's sake became born. So here I am to worship, here I am to bow down, here I am to say that you're my God. You're altogether lovely, altogether worthy, altogether wonderful to me. And I'll never know how much it cost to see my sin upon that cross. I'll never know how much it cost to see my sin upon that cross. No, I'll never know how much it cost to see my sin upon that cross. No, I'll never know how much it cost to see my sin upon that cross. So here I am to worship, here I am to bow down, here I am to say that you're my God. You're altogether lovely, altogether worthy, altogether wonderful to me. When the music fades and all is stripped away, and I simply come, longing just to bring something that's of worth that will bless your heart. I'll bring you more than a song, for a song in itself is not what you have required. You search much deeper within, and through the way things appear, you're looking into my heart. I'm coming back to the heart of worship, when it's all about you. It's all about you, Jesus. I'm sorry, Lord, for the thing I've made it, where it's all about you. It's all about you, Jesus. King of endless worth, no one could express how much you deserve. And though I'm weak and poor, all I have is yours, every single breath. I'll bring you more than a song, for a song in itself is not what you have required. You search much deeper within, and through the way things appear, you're looking into my heart. I'm coming back to the heart of worship, it's all about you. It's all about you, Jesus. I'm sorry, Lord, for the thing I've made it. When it's all about you, it's all about you. I'm coming back. I'm coming back to the heart of worship. And it's all about you. It's all about you, Jesus. I'm sorry, Lord, for the thing I've made it. When it's all about you, it's all about you, Jesus. I'll bring you more than a song, for a song in itself is not what you have required. You search much deeper within, and through the way things appear, you're looking into my heart. I'm coming back to the heart of worship, and it's all about you. It's all about you, Jesus. I'm sorry, Lord, for the thing I've made it. And it's all about you. It's all about you, Jesus.
Can you put the microphone down here? Can you put the microphone down there? And then just move that back for me. Thank you. Good morning, everybody. We've got some new faces in the room, so I'll just introduce myself. I'm Heather. I'm one of the pastors here at Vox. And I'm glad to see you here. I had a busy week. For those of you who follow me on Facebook, you will have seen that I graduated on Thursday. And so the Masters of Divinity, apparently I have mastered divinity, as one of my kids said. I'm not convinced I have mastered the divine, but you know, I did finish 30 credits in theology and Bible and stuff. So that is done. And because I had so much fun doing it, in September I start on my PhD. So total sucker for punishment. And you all get to come along for the ride. Because what I read ends up filtering into what I end up preaching. So you all get the either benefit or drawback of that. I'll let you decide. You can tell me later. I want to start, though, from hearing from you this morning. Who here has a favorite story about Jesus? Hands up. Anybody have a favorite story about Jesus? Probably? There's like not as many hands as I was seeing. I was assuming everybody would have a favorite Jesus story. Not everybody, maybe, but like lots of you. I think some of you are onto where I'm going with this. I think that's the problem. So is anybody willing to share what their favorite Jesus story is? The one in the Bible. Excellent. Excellent. That one. Good. Sid? The one where Jesus walked on water. That is pretty darn cool. I have walked on water, but only when it was frozen. So, you know, I feel like that's cheating somehow. But that is definitely an awesome story. Anybody else?
I like the one where he tells them to bring the children to him. When people are trying to usher these little insignificant people away. And it's like, oh, these are the generation.
Yeah, where Jesus is trying to tells the disciples to stop shooing the children away, but to let them come close. The children matter. Even if the children make noise, even if the children do loop-de-loops in the back, even if the children are having a little bit of a meltdown, the children all matter. That's how this works with Jesus. I like that story too. Awesome. Anybody else? Carol Ann.
When he overturns the tables in the temple.
When he overturns the tables in the temple.
Typically, everyone paints Jesus with champagne and roses. And
this is the not champagne and roses Jesus. What are we going to name this Jesus? Cranky Pants. Jesus Cranky Pants. I love it. Turning water into wine. I think several of us here at Vox think that that's a very good story. I discovered de-alcoholized wine this week, which I was very excited about because my medicine and alcohol are not good friends. And now that I stay up all night long to look after a baby, that is not good with alcohol either. So yeah, I found this really lovely de-alcoholized wine, and then I couldn't find it in the store. I found it at a restaurant. So I'm on the hunt for that. I think the water needs to turn into de-alcoholized wine now. No, it's a little different because they use like a Chardonnay grape. It tastes different. Anyways, okay, so we've got a bunch of Jesus stories that everybody likes, right? Years ago when I worked at the PRC, I had the chance to tell people stories about Jesus from time to time. That was one of the things I really liked about my job. People would come in, and mostly the people who we had these conversations with either had never heard Jesus stories at all, or they'd only heard these stories told in ways that made God out to be perpetually angry with them, right? For, I don't know, whatever it was that they thought God would be mad at them for. Sort of each person had a different thing, but you could tell that was the thing they'd grown up assuming you got in trouble for. And in that context, working almost exclusively with women, I had 4 stories that I came back to over and over again. The first was the story of the woman at the well, which it turns out we went back and looked for it this week for some other reason, but Roy preached on it November 14th of 2021, in case you want to review that. We've been in John for a long time, so that's in John chapter 4. And then one is the story of the woman who washed Jesus' feet with her finest perfume in the middle of a dinner party at this guy Simon's house. She caused quite a bit of a stir with the finer guests who had attended. One is the story of the woman who had been bleeding for 12 years, who was so worried about anybody seeing her that she just reached out and if I just touched the bottom of his robe, and she was healed. But Jesus noticed and cared and raised her up and told her that she mattered again. But as I was preparing this sermon this morning, the story that was right at the front of my mind this week was the Syrophoenician woman. That's found in Mark 7, and it's likely the same story as what's retold in Matthew 15. Now, I fully admit 1,000% that the reason I love this story is that there's a bit of a scandal to it. I know you're shocked, right? See, in this story, Jesus has done some things in his ministry in Galilee that have set the religious leaders in a bit of they've gotten a little bit antsy at him. They're on his tail. They're trying to get him. They're all het up about some things, you know. He's said and he's done some things that have gotten him in trouble. And so he goes north from Galilee into a region that is mostly inhabited by non-Jewish people called Gentiles. And while he's there, this woman comes to find him. She's heard that Jesus has been curing people. And she wants a piece of this for herself. Not for her personally, but for her daughter. So she, a Gentile woman, possibly a Canaanite Gentile woman. Remember, my youth group kids know this. Where are my youth group kids? What do the Jews think about the Canaanites? They don't like each other. That's like the understatement of the day. They're not supposed to be in relationship with each other at all, are they? They're supposed to be completely and totally separate. So she comes, this Canaanite woman comes and approaches a male Jewish rabbi and asks him to come to her house and heal her daughter. So culturally, this is something that is simply unheard of. This is not just like not wearing your fancy hat to a wedding in the 1960s as a woman, okay? Like that was kind of like, ooh, risque. This is another level entirely. This was like, the best example I could think of was like a woman in a Taliban-controlled Afghanistan town going up to an imam without her burqa on and asking for him to personally educate her daughter. It was simply not done. She has broken all of the rules, and yet she does it anyways. She asks if he would heal her daughter. And now, this is where the controversy actually starts. You thought it was already happening, but this is where it actually starts. What we have recorded is that to begin with, Jesus says no. It's the only time someone comes to him and asks for healing or curing that Jesus says no in the Gospels. And he doesn't just say no, he likens her request to that of a dog trying to steal a child's meal. He says no and does so in a way that it would be difficult to read as anything other than wildly insulting. Now, lots of people, to be clear, lots of male people who write commentaries want to tell us that this was a test by Jesus, that he always intended to say yes, that the Gentiles were always on his radar, but the text doesn't actually tell us any of that. Instead, Jesus' reply is a categorical no. Except, this is not the end of the story. The woman comes back with a response. She looks at him bold as brass, right in the eyes, and says, "You're right about the children should eat first and not the dogs, but even the dogs get the scraps that the kids drop on the floor." Can you hear the intake of breath? The woo around the crowd? Can you hear it? Like, she has just laid down. Did you catch it? And something changes in this moment. I wonder, some people think something changes in the universe, in the cosmos in this moment. Something shifts. Jesus tells her to go home, and she will find that her daughter has been cured. And it's only after this interaction that Jesus goes on to do a bunch of ministry with the Gentiles. Only after this interaction that Jesus cures other Gentiles, and only after that Jesus feeds the 4,000 Gentiles. Maybe he always intended for his message to go to the Gentiles. That's sort of the indication we get from the Old Testament. Maybe it would have gone to the Gentiles sooner or later. Again, all of the prophets, youth group kids, you know this, all the prophets, they keep talking about when the Messiah comes, the kingdom will be full of people from all the nations, right? But, maybe he was goading her a bit to test her faith. That's one of the things I read in one of the commentaries. I was like, oh, I don't know. Maybe he was trying to keep up appearances. That was another idea, because he'd already annoyed the powers that be pretty significantly, and the whole point of coming up north was to lay low for a bit. But I don't know what it was, but I absolutely love that this woman who was on the margins of the margins of the margins as far as Jesus and his followers were concerned, went toe-to-toe with Jesus to stand up for her daughter and make sure that she got some Jesus crumbs. And I love that she, from her position of want and need and othering, had enough faith to believe that Jesus could show up for her. So, we each have these stories of Jesus that we love. These stories help to buoy us in our own faith. They help to challenge us. They help us to understand who we are and who Jesus is and who we are meant to become. And we know these stories of Jesus because they got written down, right? In the first years after Jesus' death and resurrection, the stories of Jesus were just passed on from person to person. The apostles preached in the open air. They preached in gatherings of believers. And then as the apostles moved on to start new work or to take the gospel to new communities, the believers that remained reminded one another of these stories over and over the years, every time they met together, right? And as time went on, these stories were repeated time and again, until one day someone decided it would be a really good idea to start writing these things down, that these stories mattered so much they needed to be written out. Now, we don't actually know for sure who wrote down stories of Jesus first, because it's quite possible that the earliest documents, the earliest accounts have actually been lost. What we do know is that there are more than the 4 accounts we have in our Bibles. There's more than just Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And we know this because we've actually found others. We've found the Gospel of Thomas, the Gospel of Judas, the Gospel of the Nazarenes, to name just a few of them. We also suspect this because of the ways that the Gospels are written. For example, Matthew and Luke both seem to draw on material that is in the Gospel of Mark, but also on material that each of them found separately. And when it comes to the Gospel of John, it seems like he has like 3 distinct sources, right? And these sources overlap some with the sources that Mark and Matthew and Luke had, but not entirely. They don't line up perfectly. And when you think about it, this makes a lot of sense because each of these books was actually written by someone in a particular time and place for a particular group of people dealing with a particular set of problems and concerns and worries. Mark was likely written by a Greek Christian in around 70 CE. The Jews had been scattered from Jerusalem, and the Greek Christians were facing persecution, and the author of Mark wants to remind his readers that Jesus understands their suffering, that Jesus suffered with them and for them, and that because Jesus endured and because Jesus was raised from the dead, they can endure the suffering that they are going through as well. The book of Matthew was probably written about 15 years later. It was also written in Greek, but to a different group of Christians who were living in a different place and asking different questions at a different time. We assume that the author and maybe many of his original audience had begun life as Jews. This is a gospel that ties their faith in Jesus deeply back to their Jewish heritage and their Jewish traditions and their Jewish beliefs. But we also think that his audience included a number of Gentile believers, because the Gentiles are given status in the Gospel of Matthew. They're not only included, but treated very favorably in this work. It might even be that Matthew's Gospel is being written to remind them as a group that both their Jewishness and their non-Jewishness is fully included and valued in and through the life of Jesus. Written at about the same time as the book of Matthew, with some similar issues to address in terms of persecution from the Romans to Mark's gospel, many think that the book of Luke and its sequel, Acts, was written as what was called an apology, an explanation of why it was okay, why it was even good for someone to be a Christian in the Roman Empire. Now, these types of written apologies were often written as if they were to convince outsiders of the truth of their position, but they were mostly written to help those within the movement feel more secure in their beliefs. And this author seems to have a particular interest in emphasizing the response of Christians to the literal poverty and social problems they find themselves surrounded by. And then finally, we have the Gospel of John. It was the last of the Gospels to be written, another 5 to 15 years after Matthew and Luke. And it seems to draw on oral and written texts that the other Gospels didn't necessarily have access to. This author seems to have a more general audience in mind, both with the purpose of helping those who didn't know Jesus come to Jesus for the first time, but also for the purpose of teaching existing Christians more about who Jesus was and what he had come to do. And we have been in this book of John since September of 2021. And today, we finally come to the last 2 verses. We're going to do it, people. We are going to finish John. We had to send Nathan up Ben Nevis so that we could get to the end because he was just pulling it out so far, but we're going to finish it. We're going to finish it. Okay. So this is the first of the last 2 verses. This disciple is the one who told all of this. He wrote it, and we know he is telling the truth. By 100 CE, the latest dating for the book of John, all the disciples have likely died. Their first-person oral histories have been passed down through the first couple of generations of Christians, and the author of John is likely someone who heard these stories, who maybe had access to early written records of these stories, and had maybe been around long enough that he actually heard the disciples preach them himself. And now, perhaps as he reaches the end of his years, he wants to make sure that there is a written record that pulls together the various strands of what he has read and heard about Jesus over the years to preserve it for the church in the years to come. I don't know about you, but that explanation makes a lot of sense to me. As we have seen, the Jesus story is captured for us by different people at different times and for different reasons. Just like each of us has different favorite stories of Jesus, and maybe have different favorite stories of Jesus at different points in our lives, those are there for different reasons, right? They speak to something about what we're going through and what our life looks like that helps us connect to who God is, right? And I think this is a huge gift that we have been given. The Jesus story didn't just happen for one group of people at one time and one place. We don't have to become first century residents of Galilee, first century Jewish residents of Galilee for this story to make sense to us, any more than the first century Greeks scattered around the Roman Empire had to. Who Jesus was and is, what he said and taught, his death and resurrection are for each of us exactly as we are, when we are, where we are, in the midst of whatever it is we are dealing with. Which is kind of great news as far as I'm concerned. But then John finishes with this final verse. Jesus did many other things. If they were all written in books, I don't suppose there would be room enough in the whole world for all the books. This last verse got me thinking. Thinking of all the other things that Jesus did in the years of his life. All the other stories he must have told. All the other miracles he must have performed. All the other ways that he touched people and interacted with people. What it was like to lie under the open sky at night around a campfire with him when they weren't able to find a place to stay for the night. The conversations the disciples must have had with Jesus. The subtle differences in how he walked and how he talked, and how the timbre of his voice maybe changed as he looked at different people and met them exactly where they were. All of these little details. And I thought about how short all the stories that were recorded are compared to all the details that could have been recorded in each instance. And I thought about how much we must be missing. And maybe that's what the author of John is talking about. Maybe. But then I also thought about how much space scrolls take up. I thought about the library in Alexandria, right, with all of these scrolls. This was like the biggest library that would have been known in the Greek time period. And I thought about how big they understood the world to be. They knew about the world all the way east to like India and all the way north to Britain, but they didn't know about North America or South America. But that's still like a pretty big world, right? And I thought about some of the biggest, longest biographies that have been published. In fact, I got curious about what the longest biography ever written was. Does anybody know? Anybody have a guess? Who has the most number of words in a biography about themselves? It's the biography of Winston Churchill. It currently has 8 volumes plus 16 companion volumes, totaling 10 million words. This is just 11 of those 24 volumes. They're still writing it, apparently. And I realized that even this man's life, this man who served extensively in public office, including as the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom during the Second World War, this man who didn't die until he was 90 years old, This man who wrote speeches after speeches after speeches after speeches that you could draw on because they're all in the public record. If this man couldn't fill the whole world with books about his words, then maybe there's more to this statement than we've got here so far. I thought maybe we need to dig deeper, which got me thinking of the other Jesus stories I know. The stories I've encountered in people in church history who have experienced Jesus's being in their lives. The stories of the ways that Jesus has shown up for them as people when it seemed that there were no other options. Stories of how Jesus has brought to justice to situations that were unjust and given people courage when the way forward felt impossible, and healed people and provided release for people who felt trapped. Over the last 2,000 years, in fact, over 1 billion Christians have seen the story of Jesus continue in and through their own lives. We meet the very first of these stories in the book of Acts. There's the way that Jesus met the Ethiopian eunuch in the pages of Isaiah and the presence of Philip on the road. The way Jesus met Cornelius in his house through the presence of Peter, and the way that Peter's ideas of how big the Jesus story could be were exploded by his experience with Cornelius. And then we can page through the rest of the New Testament and realize that all of the people in all of the churches that all of these letters are written to also had experiences of Jesus. They also got to experience the continuation of the Jesus story in their lives, in their towns, in their cultures, and in their situations. But then Jesus didn't stop showing up in the lives of believers when the books of the Bible are written and gathered together. We have records of Christians, famous Christians like Origen and Augustine, who tell us in their writings about their experiences of Jesus. Christians like Brother Anthony, the first desert father, and Basil the Great, who started the first urban monastery, who left legacies in the people and movements that they initiated. These records and writings can be fabulous sources for us to connect with the Jesus story down through the ages. But to me, they still have this sense of distance to my everyday life. It can seem as though the Jesus story continues, but only in the lives of very special, very unique people. People like famous theologians and bishops and monks. And depending on how hard you're willing to dig, you might not even realize that there are women like Hildegard of Benin or Julian of Norwich who fall into this category. So you might start to wonder whether the Jesus story only continues in the lives of some male bodies, or some cisgender bodies, or some straight bodies, or some able bodies. Or because of the way that we have privileged the voices of white European and North American Christians over the years, you might not know about people like Bishop Oscar Romero, or womanist theologian Dolores Williams, or Canadian Indigenous teacher Ray Aldred. And you might think that the Jesus story only flows down through some white bodies that are situated predominantly in North America and Europe. But what I love about the Jesus story is that more often than not, it continues down through average, everyday nobodies like you and me, that hardly anyone has ever heard of and who almost no one will remember in 100 years. We don't have very many records of these people, but there's 3 I want to tell you about briefly this morning who I don't think I've told you about yet. I know I've told you some of these stories, but trying to catch these, these are great stories, right? We need to know them. The first is the story of Brother Lawrence. He was an illiterate peasant in early 17th century France. He was born in 1610. After a brief period of serving in the army during the 30 Years' War, he did not have a choice about this. He was wounded and he was left permanently disabled. At the age of 26, he joined a Carmelite monastery where he would spend much of the rest of his life as a lay worker, washing dishes or repairing shoes in the basement. It's not an exciting job. He was poor, he was disabled, he had no education, he had no position of any note, and he worked a hard, monotonous, manual labor job, and that was his daily companion. But it was there that Brother Lawrence discovered the Jesus story in and through the threads of all of his work. That Jesus was there in the midst of his pain, in the midst of his labor, in the midst of his poverty and his limited education. What he came to realize was that Jesus was present in all of the little things in the world, and that it was our task as followers of Jesus to learn to tune into God's presence wherever we are and whatever we're doing. He became known at his time for experiencing incredible peace despite his circumstances, and his ideas were compiled by some of the monks in his monastery after his death in a little book you can actually buy called The Practice of the Presence of God. If you work a monotonous life, if, for example, I don't know, you get up with a baby every night for hours and hours and hours, and you're wondering where God is in the middle of that season of your life, then, the practice of the presence of God. If you work shelving things in a store and it is boring and monotonous and nobody ever notices you and nobody ever gives you any appreciation, the practice of the presence of God is an amazing, little tiny, easy to read book. The second story is from a few years later, but across the ocean. Sor Juana Inés de la Cruz is also a 17th century nun. She lived in the second half of the 17th century in Mexico. And she didn't just learn to read and write, but she did it despite prohibitions against women learning these basic skills in Mexico at the time. And she did it to such an extent that she became one of the best educated people of her age. She became a philosopher, a theologian, a composer, and a poet. But she did all of that locked away in a nunnery under the control of church authorities who actively spent her entire life trying to silence her. For her, the heart of the Jesus story was found in Christ's actions elevating the status of women in scriptures. She was convinced that the scriptures taught equality for women and worked tirelessly to support movements towards this end in the church and the state of her time. As such, we're not surprised, she was condemned by the religious elite of her time and forced to have one of the worst punishments I can imagine. A moment of silence. She was forced to sell all of her books. Do you know how many books I have at my house? She was forced to sell all of her books. I can't even imagine. And she died, having caught the plague while tending her fellow nuns. Though she was eloquent and tireless, her Mexican heritage, her gender, and her vows of chastity and poverty mean that we are only just now learning about her. Sor Juana Inés de la Cruz, and I can write that out for you when I'm not sitting up here. I can't pronounce it very well. My Spanish is appalling. I apologize. Finally, the story of a woman named Mary Prince. Her story was related, apparently we are going to lose all of our notes. 1 second. Her story was related to someone else in the early 19th century because she couldn't read or write. And I'm just going to find it again. It was related to a member of Britain's abolitionist society after she managed to escape slavery while in Britain with her master. Her life had been one of endless hardship. She was born to slaves and moved from master to master throughout her life. She had endured beatings, suffered horrific conditions, been mistreated, been separated from her family, her husband, her children. Her entire life had been spent at the mercy of other people's whims. However, at various points in her life, she had also encountered Christians who offered her love, safety, shelter, opportunity, and physical and financial support. And for Mary, the Jesus story was passed on through freedom from slavery, through warm clothing, through money for survival, through nursing her through an illness, and through the work of the abolitionists. The recording of her story was Mary's small attempt to join with the Jesus story in her time by fighting for justice and the end of slavery for those in the British colonies. Poor, disabled, shut away, slaves, women, these are the kind of everyday people I look out for when I'm studying church history. Because for me, their lives and experiences of Jesus are some of the most powerful witnesses to the continuation of the Jesus story imaginable. These people didn't have wealth or power. They didn't have easy access to education or lives of luxury to make it simple for them to come to know Jesus. But each of them experienced Jesus' presence right in the middle of their lives, in their particular times and places, in their bodies and experiences. To me, that is really powerful. So, we have the Jesus story in the scriptures. We have the Jesus story in the church throughout history. And now I've asked 3 people from here at Vox to come on up. If you guys can make your way up now. And I've asked them to tell a brief story. If we go over, it's not on me. I asked them each to tell a brief story, but I'm giving them the microphone, so it'll be what it'll be, of how they have experienced the Jesus story in their lives. So Mike, you get first at the mic.
Pull it up here. I'll put one of you.
It's completely okay to have notes. Nothing wrong with that.
It's easier because I stay focused.
Yeah, exactly.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Michael. All right, I'm going to have to wing it.
Gonna have to wing it.
Yes, I don't know where it is. My Jesus story. Okay. When I was 18 years old, back in 1985, I suffered from a post-traumatic I suffered from a traumatic accident. And so it was late at night. It was about 10 o'clock at night. I had been out earlier in the day, and then I was on my way home. And I stopped off at a friend's house and visited for a bit. Then I came outside, and it was raining. I had the opportunity to get a ride from my friend whose place I was living at the time to get a ride home, but I decided instead to take the bicycle, and ride it home. So I ended up driving down the road, and I had a decision to make, either to go down this way or go that way. I chose to go that way, and it was raining so hard that I wasn't able to see what was in front of me. I had my head down. I lifted my head up, and sure enough, there was a car parked there, and so I ended up hitting the car. I wasn't knocked unconscious, thank God. Again, Jesus in my life. And I was able to sit there and flag my friend down because he hadn't passed me yet. And again, it was really dark and stormy and everything. So he picked me up and took me to the hospital. And again, it was and prior to that, a couple of months before that, I dedicated my life to Jesus. And I always kind of had that, what am I trying to say? I've always had God in my life, my whole entire life. I just didn't utilize God. But just before that happened and everything, I did dedicate my life to Jesus and everything. And he got me through that night and saved my life and such, because again, I wasn't knocked unconscious, and I felt like I've learned over the years that God does for me what I can't do for myself. So he saved my life, and it was very traumatic, and I was able to get through it, and I think that's all I had to say. So thank you.
Thanks, Mike.
Hey everybody, I'm Jess. And when Heather asked me to share my Jesus story, I was a little bit overwhelmed. About a year and a half ago, my fiance and I came out to our families, which was a freeing experience, but also one of the most challenging things that we faced as a couple, as individuals. It was really been a year and a half of incredible growth. And as we started that process, we knew that it was going to be so important for us to have community, and not just community of friends, but community of brothers and sisters in Christ. And so we were hoping and praying and faithfully just seeking God's face and saying, okay, God, like, what do you have next for us in this season? And so we were praying and praying and praying for a church, a little church that we could come to, that would support our family, that would encourage us in our faith walk, and that would just kind of lead us closer and closer to God. And little did we know, we were living on Innisfil Street, which is literally a block and a half away. Nick came across a website, and we found Vox. And so as we walked in the doors, we just felt like such an overwhelming sense of peace and love and faith and just really God's presence in our lives. And so we didn't know that that would be the start of a significant journey for us, but the way that Jesus has just faithfully shown up in our lives, and you as a Vox community have shown up in our lives, has been very I'm trying not to get emotional here, just very emotionally impactful to us. Just seeing how people could care about us, that love Jesus and love us, has been something really, really special to us over the last couple of years.
Thanks, Jess.
Hi, guys. My name is Tandy, like candy, but with a T. When Heather asked me to speak about God story, Jesus story, God story, I found it very hard to pick just one. And Heather's like, you're not listening to the rules.
She was like, so how long do I have? Because I could just start talking. I was like, we're going to try for 1 minute to 2 minutes. She's like, I don't know about that.
I was like, how do you tell a God story? Well, you guys did amazing. And it was very impactful, and we understood. I was like, Heather, you can't give me 2 minutes to talk about a God story, because I feel like standing right here is a God story. Being involved with Vox, and I couldn't have come to Vox without being involved with Redwood and Tim and Rhonda. When they created Redwood, they would have never thought the spunky, outrageous, just says whatever comes to her mind. A person would join Redwood and join Vox, and I couldn't ever have gone to Redwood if I didn't, unfortunately, separate from my kid's father. And my kid's father just happened to be the one that saved me after my parents passed. So it's so hard to just talk about one God story, because I feel like he's been constant, even way before I even knew I would be standing here. And like he said, I just didn't utilize him. I thought I was living in a nightmare, but he was present, and I just want to say thank you.
Thank you, everyone. We give these brave souls a hand. I was mean, because, we often, ask for people to answer questions while we're preaching, and some of you like to speak, and so we hear your voices and your stories fairly regularly, and some of you are very quiet. And you'll notice that I purposely asked the very quiet people for this morning. So that puts everyone on notice. You are all potentially, Exactly. There's a moral to this story somewhere. I'll let you figure it out. But the point, I do want you to catch this. Each and every one of us, by virtue of being here this morning, wherever we are at in our story, are part of this Jesus story that is continuing. It isn't just happening up to today. It continues on into the future. It continues on into eternity. It continues today all around the world. It is not just here in North America. It is not just in this particular, in a particular denomination or in a particular movement of the church. There are denominations and churches around the world that you have never, ever heard of because I have never, ever heard of them. We had a lesson at one point in school. I can't remember when it was exactly. And there's something like 50,000 denominations in the world today. So the church is so big and so wide. There are over 1 billion Christians living in the world today. So big and so wide. And the Jesus story continues, and it continues all over the world, and it continues in each and every one of our lives, wherever we are at. Just simply by virtue of the fact that you are here this morning, wherever you are at with Jesus, the Jesus story is continuing. And we each, therefore, have an opportunity to look for, to encounter, and to witness the Jesus story in our world today. It's not going to look the same from one person to the next. These 3 stories were not the same 3 stories, and if I had every single one of you on the stage, we would hear that many stories, right? But the Jesus story will continue to be present. It will continue to be written in and through the lives of each of us who follow Jesus, because that is part of what it means for us to be Jesus people. So I want to encourage you today to think about where you are seeing the Jesus story in your own life right now. I'd love for you to share those stories with each other after church today, over coffee this week, on the Vox family page, text a friend. I don't care. Whatever makes sense for you. It's your story. You tell it your way, a way that makes sense to the story Jesus is telling in your life. But take time to look for these stories. Take time at the end of each day even to take a look for the Jesus story in your life. It's this old practice called the practice of examine. Look out for how is Jesus working in your life and through your life and in the people around you. Pay attention to it. Maybe even get a journal and write it down if you're a journaling, writing things down kind of person. I'm not great at that, but taking the time to notice this, it can be really, really powerful to see where Jesus is at work in your own story. I'll get the worship team to come up and I'll pray. Jesus, thank you. Thank you for your story that runs through the pages of all of Scripture, from creation, first breath, to the final passage of Revelation. Thank you for your story that runs through the threads of all of the lives of those who have chosen to follow you over the years. And thank you for the way that your story is working itself out here at Vox, in this little church, in this back theater of a kids' arts studio. God, yet you are involved. Jesus, your story continues in this place in powerful, powerful ways. Jesus, help us to see your story in our lives. Help us to see your story in each other's lives. Help us to celebrate your story in and around and through the lives of the people we know and the lives that we are living, so that you can be glorified, so that you can be honored, and so that we can join with you in your story for the fullness of seeing it worked out in the world today. Your kingdom come on earth as it is in heaven. Your story come in our lives as it does in the lives of all those who follow you. Amen.
Thanks, Heather and Mike and Jess and Tandy. Thank you so much for sharing this morning. For our last song today, if you are willing and able and you'd like to stand with us, please do so as we sing. Oh, I sang it. I did the wrong chords.
There we go.
Greatest day in history, death is beaten, you have rescued me. Sing it out, Jesus is alive. The empty cross, the empty grave, life eternal, you have won the day. Shout it out, Jesus is alive. He's alive, and oh, happy day, you wash my sin away. And oh, happy day, I'll never be the same. Forever I am changed. When I stand in that place, free at last, meeting face to face, I am yours, Jesus, you are mine. Endless joy and perfect peace, earthly pain finally will cease. Celebrate, Jesus is alive. He's alive, and oh, happy day, you wash my sin away. And oh, happy day, I'll never, oh, happy day, oh, happy day, you wash my sin away. Oh, happy day, I'll never be the same. Forever I am changed. And oh, what a glorious day, what a glorious way that you have saved me. And oh, what a glorious day, what a glorious day. Yeah. Oh, happy day, you washed my sin away. And oh, happy day, I'll never, oh, happy day, oh, happy day, you washed my sin away. And oh, happy day, I'll never be the same. Forever I am changed.
And now, no, you can stay standing. You can stay standing. You're good. Work out the kinks. You're going to have to walk in a minute. It's all good. Now, to him who is able to do immeasurably more than all we ask or imagine, according to his power that is at work within each and every one of us. To him be glory in the church and in Christ Jesus and in our lives throughout all generations, forever and ever. Amen. Thank you so much for joining us this week. We will be back here again next week.
Same bad channel.
And I think Nathan will be back from Scotland by then. So we have Reverend Sunshine sermon to look forward to when he gets back. This is his new sermon series. When he gets back from hiking, we get a Reverend Sunshine sermon. No, it's Reverend Sunshine. It's Reverend Sunshine. Okay.
I have been forcefully corrected that we will not be allowed to call ourselves Father or... No. Just, no.
See you all next week.